There's a number that keeps financial planners awake at night, but rarely reaches the families who need it most. 70% of families lose everything they've built by the second generation. Not because of market crashes, not because of bad luck, because of three invisible patterns that are active right now in your financial life, draining security while you believe you're protecting it. If you've spent decades building something meaningful, a paid-off home, retirement accounts, maybe college funds for your kids, you've probably told yourself the story that responsible people tell themselves. Keep cash accessible for emergencies, don't burden children with financial conversations, and trusts are for people with private jets, not for families earning $100,000 to $500,000 a year. That story feels prudent, it feels safe, and it's the exact mechanism that will evaporate what you've built within 18 months of it reaching the next generation. The destruction isn't theoretical, it's mathematical. Right now, as you're listening to this, inflation is eroding 3 to 4% of your purchasing power annually. That savings account you thought was protecting your family, it's losing $6,000 to $8,000 in real value every single year without a single transaction appearing. Your children, who will inherit assets they've never been taught to manage, statistically make devastating mistakes within the first year and a half of receiving significant wealth. And your carefully accumulated capital sits completely exposed to three silent predators: creditor claims, estate taxes, and family disputes. One lawsuit, one health crisis, one contentious divorce in the next generation can legally seize everything you spent 40 years building. The first pattern is excess liquidity without structure. Most families believe keeping significant cash reserves demonstrates financial responsibility. The instinct makes sense, keep money liquid in case something happens. But here's the brutal math that no one calculates. If you're holding $200,000 in a traditional savings account earning 0.5% interest while inflation runs at 3.5%, you're not protecting that money. You're watching it dissolve. 3% annual erosion on $200,000 is $6,000 of real purchasing power vanishing every 12 months. Over 10 years, $60,000 in value simply evaporated because it sat in what felt like the safest place. Wealthy families who actually preserve capital across generations understand something most people miss. Protection and liquidity are not the same thing. Protection requires strategic allocation, not emotional hoarding. It means understanding the capital-to-liquidity ratio that signals overexposure. Financial advisors who work with multi-generational wealth preservation aim for what they call the 3 to 6 month rule. Keep 3 to 6 months of living expenses in truly liquid accounts, then deploy everything else into inflation-resistant structures. Real estate, dividend-producing equities, treasury inflation-protected securities, assets that move with or ahead of inflation, not behind it. Think about it this way: that cash you're protecting, it's not staying still, it's moving backward. Every month that passes, it buys less. Every year its value shrinks. You're working to add to it, but inflation is working faster to subtract from it. And the gap between what you think you have and what that money can actually purchase in 10 or 20 years when your children might need it, that gap is where generational wealth dies quietly. The second pattern is the absence of wealth transfer education. Research from estate planning firms tracking thousands of families found that 76% of wealth transfers fail not because the assets weren't there, but because the heirs weren't prepared to receive them. Parents spend 30, 40, sometimes 50 years building something meaningful. And in all that time, they never have a single substantive conversation with their children about how that wealth works, what it costs to maintain, or what responsibilities come with inheritance. The silence isn't malicious. It usually comes from good intentions, not wanting to create entitlement, not wanting children to become lazy, not wanting to make money the center of family relationships. But here's the inversion no one discusses: that protective silence doesn't prevent entitlement. It guarantees incompetence. When unprepared inheritors suddenly receive significant assets, they make predictable mistakes. They pay off low-interest debt instead of maintaining emergency reserves. They liquidate growth investments to buy depreciating assets. They fail to understand tax implications and trigger massive, avoidable tax bills. One estate attorney documented a case where siblings inherited a thriving family business worth $3.2 million. Within 16 months, They destroyed it through operational decisions they didn't understand, tax mistakes they didn't anticipate, and interpersonal conflicts they had no framework to resolve. The business sold at liquidation for $470,000. 85% of the value their parents built gone, not because the children were malicious or stupid, but because they'd never been taught. Families that preserve wealth have specific conversations, and they start those conversations years before any transfer happens. They don't wait until a parent is dying to suddenly explain the family's financial situation. They bring children into discussions about investments when those children are in their 20s. They explain how much it costs to maintain the lifestyle the family enjoys. They walk through what happens to assets when someone dies without a clear plan. One wealth management firm created what they call the three-conversation framework. The first conversation, usually when children are in their early 20s, focuses on family values around money, what it means, what it doesn't mean, how it should be used. The second conversation, typically 5 to 10 years later, introduces the actual numbers. What exists, where it's held, who manages it, what the annual costs are. The third conversation, ideally a decade before any transfer, walks through the actual transfer plan. What the children will receive when they'll receive it, what structures are in place, and what their responsibilities will be. The third pattern, and this is the one that catches the most families completely unprepared, is the lack of legal protection structures. Most middle to upper middle class families assume trusts and asset protection vehicles are only for the ultra-wealthy. That assumption leaves their capital completely exposed. A single personal injury lawsuit against a family member, an unexpected long-term care need that Medicaid rules would otherwise protect against, a child's divorce where state law treats inherited assets as marital property. Any of these can legally seize assets that took decades to build. The exposure isn't theoretical. Creditor judgments, estate taxes in states with low exemption thresholds, family disputes that turn into litigation, these aren't rare edge cases. They're common outcomes when wealth transfers happen without structural protection. Here's what most people don't realize. The cost of setting up basic asset protection for a family earning between $100,000 and $500,000 is typically between $2,000 and $5,000. One time. The cost of not having that protection. It can be everything. One family in Minnesota had accumulated $1.4 million in retirement accounts and home equity. No trust, no asset protection. Their adult son, a contractor, got sued when a client claimed negligent workmanship led to water damage. The contractor didn't have adequate liability insurance. The lawsuit named him, and because he lived in a property his parents owned, named them as co-defendants under premises liability. The judgment was $980,000. The family lost their home. Protection isn't paranoia, it's planning, and it doesn't require wealth most families don't have. A properly structured revocable living trust can protect assets from probate costs and delays. An irrevocable trust, set up years before any need for Medicaid, can protect a home and savings from long-term care costs. A limited liability company holding rental property can shield personal assets from claims against that property. These aren't exotic structures. They're standard tools that have become increasingly accessible as estate planning software and legal services have scaled down costs. So here's the self-assessment framework. Calculate your capital-to-liquidity ratio. Add up everything in checking, savings, and money market accounts. Divide that by your total investable assets. If that ratio is above 30%, you're overexposed to inflation erosion. Then ask yourself, when was the last substantive conversation I had with my children about how family wealth works? If the answer is never, or if the answer is vague comments about values but no actual numbers, your heirs are unprepared. Finally, do you have any legal structures in place that would protect family assets from creditor claims, estate taxes, or family disputes? If the answer is no, your wealth is completely exposed. The families who preserve wealth across generations share one characteristic. They treat wealth transfer as an active process, not a passive event. They don't wait until someone dies to figure out what happens next. They don't assume that good intentions translate into good outcomes. And they don't confuse having accumulated something with having protected it. Protection requires structure. It requires education. It requires legal clarity, and it requires understanding that what feels safe, cash sitting still, children kept innocent of financial realities, informal family agreements, is often the opposite of what's actually secure. The question isn't whether your family has wealth worth protecting. The question is whether that protection exists anywhere except in your intentions. Because intentions don't transfer. Structures do.